A country's exposure to security threats was limited to land, air, and sea. But now there is a fourth frontier of attack, and the nation can be attacked severely and perhaps even more disastrously, in a more disastrous manner from the cyberspace. And so we set up this task force. This task force had already covered a lot of ground and was supposed to expire and submit a report to the Cabinet Secretary on 17th of August this year. While that task force was about to complete its work, two things happened. One, the attempted attack on the e-citizen platform, which paralyzed and interfered with the activities in that platform for a day or two towards the end of July. Number two, WorldCoin. And those two developments led the ministry and the government to determine there is need to do more substantive work and include these new frontiers of cyber security threats. And for that reason, the task force period has been extended for another 3 months, and their recommendations will be able to help us tackle all the gaps in the law and policy around this area. But in the meantime, in a summary, Chair, the gaps at the moment are around the registration of companies, and entities that want to be data controllers or data processors under the Data Protection Act. The kind of documents that are supposed to be presented before a company or an entity is registered as a data controller or data processor, the issues around eligibility for issuance of certificates as a data controller or processor. We believe the law needs to clarify, amplify, and make it a bit rigorous. Not everybody should be able to collect data and control data for the same reason, as I have said. The same way the country's security today is being threatened beyond the three traditional areas of land, air, and sea, with now cyberspace coming on board. The same way, in a similar way, in a similar manner, data is becoming the gold of the future. What gold was to the economies of the 18th and 19th century is what data is going to be. Whoever controls and processes data is going to be holding into very valuable assets. So it should not be easy that anybody can come simply because they have an inducement and start processing the data of people and controlling that data. So the process of registering those who control data, those who process data, should be made more rigorous under our laws. Two, foreign companies seeking to become data controllers, data processors, the kind of documents and eligibility criteria should even be harsher. They should be harsher than the eligibility criteria of companies and entities of the people of Kenya. And the reasons are for reasons of national sovereignty. It is actually something we need to reflect on. And I know, Chair, I've had this discussion elsewhere in a different space. Data being what it is today, a crucial asset, a crucial tool that can be used not only for good purposes like commerce and business decisions, but data can be used to harm. So a foreign entity, a foreign company, or even a Kenyan company or entity which is associated or has allegiance to a foreign entity must be treated with a lot of rigor before they are allowed to process, retain, and control data of the people of Kenya. What worries me as the minister responsible for the security of our country in this particular matter was the kind of data that was being harvested. Because iris, the scanning of iris, is one of the most intrusive data harvesting methods. There are other methods, but the scanning of the eyes is quite intrusive. It's deeply intrusive. Number two, experts say that the biological consequences of that intrusion, it could be disastrous. It could be life-threatening. So from where I sit, Chair and members, I think we should be very careful with allowing foreigners to access, control, process, and retain the data of the people of Kenya for the reasons I've given. Number three, the current law does not pronounce itself on circumstances when data controllers and or data processors give incentives to induce subjects to provide data and the punishment for inducement. In other words, should a data processor or controller use an inducement as a way of obtaining the consent of the person from whom data is harvested? And therefore, the question that in our investigations we would want to establish is, besides the gap being there, is whether the consent of the Kenyans that gave consent for their iris to be scanned was informed consent, voluntary consent, or it was consent obtained through inducement and undue influence. And the lawyer's chair will tell you that whether or not the consensual contracts were signed, the contracts of consent, any contracts obtained through either duress, inducement, or fraud, misrepresentation, all those contracts are avoidable and they can be rescinded and they can be avoided, etc., etc. In other words, Chair, it is not enough. First of all, we must ask ourselves as the people of Kenya that if I come and I'm processing or harvesting data, and instead of asking for that data and asking for the consent, I have some money in my pocket. And I tell the people of Kenya, I have some money here, but please, you must allow me to do this. Is that lawful? Is that even moral? Is it something that we should allow as a country? Next, the Act does not provide for specific proof to the Commission, the Data Commission, that to ascertain itself that the subjects of data collection were taken through the purpose. The people whose data is being collected. It is not clear, neither is the Commission obligated to ensure that the public in whose data is being collected is thoroughly made aware what the purpose of that data would be in the short term, in the mid-term, in the long term. Next, enforcement and issues around enforcement of this act on data protection needs to be enhanced. And now that the laws of Kenya are silent on cryptocurrency, which is currently one of the most popular financial tools for organized crime, based on the reports from other countries, other jurisdictions. We should ask ourselves whether cryptocurrency should continue to take place without regulation, without the CBK oversight, or we should recognize it and regulate it and move on. The gray situation we are in, our continuous maintenance of a middle ground, is not helpful to the country, and it threatens both our security and our sovereignty as a country. Honorable Chair, as I have said, the Ministry of Interior has established the task force, which has been established under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018. And we are going to attach very, very detailed regulations on enforcement of, or further administration of that act. The drafts are ready, public participation is ready, and we are going to include these new challenges that we've gotten from the attack on the e-citizen platform and the WorldCoin issue, to make sure that we take on board comprehensive reforms. Finally, Chair, the following are the recommended areas of intervention. One, there is need to consider and redraft criminal offenses. The criminal offenses section under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018 to remove duplicated provisions, to delimit the scope of the offenses, and to better specify the objective and subjective elements of the crime. In other words, that area of the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018 on offenses is scanty. We must develop two things there. One, we must expand the scope of the possible crimes which can be committed under this law on computer misuse and cyber crimes. Number two, we must also provide and develop what lawyers call elements of the crime. We must provide for both the objective and subjective elements that constitute the crime. That is the only way to capture everything. Because tomorrow, today is WorldCoin, tomorrow there will be another thing which is not covered in the law. And my experience tells me, beyond just criminalizing certain conducts, we need to go further and develop the elements of the crime in such broad terms that even in future, a new activity would easily fall under the expanded and elaborated section on crimes under this cyberspace. Number two, it may be possible for Parliament to actually take on this issue of cryptocurrency even in a separate act of Parliament. Okay, and just perhaps for a run for the rest of the world and how we need to handle this matter of cryptocurrency. The current law does not distinguish between serious and less serious types of harm, which is worrying for me from my legal background. It tends to treat, the current act tends to treat violation of computer or misuse of computers and cyber crimes like conduct which falls in the same hierarchy. I have already demonstrated, Chair, to this committee that even when it comes to violation of data privacy, depending on the methods used and the procedures used to harvest data, you can create a hierarchy of crimes because some of the conduct is more intrusive, it has more dangers and more risks on the victims, and therefore we require to have a hierarchy of crimes so that we distinguish between small crimes, medium crimes, and what we would call egregious crimes on this cyberspace. And penetrating, for example, somebody's eyes with electronic equipment, harvesting that data and storing it as huge biological and chemical consequences and health implications. And that's part of what our investigations should help us to establish. Finally, I think we need to establish the National Cybersecurity Agency under the Act. This agency should help us to regulate the cyber space and act as a bridge between industry and government, and provide a unified source of advice, guidance, and support for cybersecurity, including proper management of the cyber space. We need to amend the certain provisions of the National Intelligence Act number 28 of 2012 to address digital economic sabotage. Now that we've moved to e-commerce, e-government, e-services, we need to empower our National Intelligence Service Agency to be able to rein in on the cyberspace and be able to intercept activities and data in the cyberspace to avoid a situation of digital economic sabotage. We also need to amend other laws, including Access to Information Act of 2016, to incorporate strict parameters on extraction of information by digital internet-based companies. The Access to Information Act needs to be amended in that respect. And then also there is need, as I have said, to think whether time has not come for us to have a standalone Cryptocurrency Act of Kenya. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
So thank you so much, the CS, for that very in-depth and elaborate discussion. You've actually gone a long way to try to really outline and pinpointed the gaps in our existing laws to address the same. Now, maybe before I go to the plenary and give members to contribute, it has now been in the public domain and it's obvious. We had the